Welcome to Ray Presents. Today, my guest is the one and only Peter Sloly. Many of you know him as Ottawa's former chief of police, but beyond the badge, he's a leader who's deeply committed to community, equity, and positive change. As he says, others before self, compassion for all. Mr. Sloly, thank you very much for being here to share your journey with me. How are you doing?
Excellent, Ray. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be on your show.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So your career spans from policing, professional sports, and consulting. How have these experiences shaped your leadership approach, and what key lessons do you still apply today?
I actually have a fourth career now into academia, where I'm
Yes.
working at the University of Toronto. But to your question, Ray, each career sort of builds on the next one. When I played professional sports as a young teenager going into my young adulthood, I learned the discipline of hard work, the need for goal setting, obviously teamwork. I was often a captain or co-captain of my team, so you learn leadership skills. I spent on average 5, 6, sometimes 7 days a week doing school and doing professional sports. So you learn to multitask, you learn how to do high performance over long periods of time. Those were all competitive advantages when I went into my policing career. In policing, you learn a lot about humanity, your own humanity, and the broader, more complex human condition. When I went into the private sector, I had that grounding in humanity as I went into a for-profit sector. And so I never lost sight of the human touch, even when I was earning a larger salary and contributing to a profit-making enterprise. And then now in academia, in my late 50s, I've acquired a lot of wisdom over the years, and I'm able to share that now with a younger group of leaders, people who will be leading this society forward into the future.
Amazing. Which one is the most exciting to you?
Well, I still find my days long ago as a young man traveling the world playing soccer and getting paid for it. I'd have to say that was the most exciting. In terms of the most impactful, obviously the long years I spent, the decades I spent in policing and public service. In terms of, where I acquired a more global understanding of what was going on, it was my 3.5 years in the private sector. And now I have to tell you, when I'm in academia, I realize the more you know, the less you know. So each of them are providing a wonderful aspect to life. If you're asking purely most exciting, yeah, playing soccer and getting paid for it, traveling around the world as a young man, that one checks the box.
Amazing. The more you know, the less you know. I like that. So with your focus on community policing, how can law enforcement better serve diverse communities and build trust in today's complex environment?
Yeah, Ray, first of all, I won't go too long on this, but I really don't like the term law enforcement. I understand why it's used. It's a North American habit that really came out of the United States, and their approach to policing is almost exclusively law enforcement, enforcing the law and using force to do so. Canada comes from a much broader context where policing is the term that I use because law enforcement is only a portion of it. Community policing, I actually think, is the best term. And I know there's a lot of folks who listen to you and people who have challenged me over the years saying, there is no good type of policing. And I can accept that and understand that. I push on that a little. Yes, policing that is apart from the community and sometimes against the community's best interests or their own stated interests can be very dangerous, can be very harmful. But policing that is in the community, with the community, is respectful of the community and is focused on earning trust with that community. Won't always be perfect. There'll be mistakes made, no doubt. But they will learn the community's priorities, its unique circumstances, its diverse and rich histories, and it will do better more consistently. It'll be able to meet those needs and still earn trust. So community policing in that context is what I've always enjoyed doing. It's what I've tried to build the police services that I've had leadership roles in, both in Toronto and in Ottawa and in my peacekeeping mission in Kosovo. And those principles have stayed with me for decades. I believe that's still the best form of policing, and we can build trust and confidence and safety within that context.
Perfect. You spoke about your mission in Kosovo. Can you tell me more about it? How was that experience?
Yeah, probably overall the best experience in my life, Ray. It was two tours of duty between 2001 and 2002. Kosovo was just coming out of a years-long war, as well as unfortunate human rights crises in terms of ethnic cleansing that was taking place in the Balkans in the breakup of the former Yugoslavia. I went in more towards the middle and back end of the conflict and was more involved in peace building and peacekeeping. So we were building a brand new police service while still delivering police services. Working within the United Nations, working in such a complex environment really tested me on every level, mentally, physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. But again, it was a wonderful opportunity to travel, to work. I worked with 54 different police agencies. I traveled to 4 different continents. It was a very exciting, crisis-driven period of the world history, right at the turn of the century. So really, really enjoyed it. Really grew a lot from it.
That's amazing. Wow, what a great experience, global, experience all around the world. I love that. So you've led through high pressure situations during your career, including your time as Ottawa police chief. How do you stay resilient and lead effectively when you're under intense public scrutiny? I don't think there's anyone, who's better suited to answer this question than you.
Appreciate that, Ray. I learned from people who went before me and had their own challenges in the spotlight and walked into arenas not of their choosing, but they had to stand in there. One of the things I learned is just on a personal wellness standpoint. I think that's even more important now for this generation of leaders than it was for mine. You got to look after your health. You've got to stay physically fit. You've got to take that mental well-being approach far more consciously than I ever did at any point in my previous careers. Things like getting enough sleep, learning how to manage stress, building good networks, which starts, I believe, with family and friends and includes mentors and coaches, advisors. Those are all things that are helpful. I'm a big person around faith. I've grown up in the Christian religion, but I'm not trying to impose my religion on any of your viewers. But I think just having faith, whether it comes from a religious standpoint or it comes from just faith in humanity, that overall human beings are good and decent people, and we look for that as opposed to looking for something that's wrong or evil in people. I think that goes a long way in staying positive. And then you just got to understand who you are, what your values are, what your family values are. And no matter what the circumstances or the crisis that's breaking on you, or multiple crises breaking on you, you stay as true as you can to those values and those principles, which I've always tried to do.
That's amazing advice. You know what? I've actually seen you at church a few times. Never had an opportunity to reach out. I was telling my wife, "Hey, that's Mr. Sloly over there." I was like, "Yeah, leave him alone." But no, it's great. It's great advice. I want to go back to. Well, I'd like to discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion. In your work promoting equity and inclusion, what challenges have you faced, and what drives you to keep pushing for change?
Yeah, I feel like the world of DEI, had an anti-discrimination in our case, anti-Black racism, but it feels like we go on a pendulum. Depending on the politics locally, nationally, depending on the geopolitics, what's going on around the world, we swing to the left and it's all DEI all the time and you can't invest enough of it. It feels like we're swinging back to the right. And we need to divest ourselves of this. We went too far. It's too woke. Somewhere in the middle is where human beings are. We're very imperfect creatures. We all have our personal biases. When we get together in groups, that tends to amplify each other. With the role of social media now, where we're getting more tribal and polarized than ever before, regardless of whether you're on the right side of the political spectrum or on the left, whether you're white or black, man or woman, whatever you self-identify as, there's always an us and a them in the context of human beings. So I think there's always a need for us to be very conscious, frontal lobe conscious around these issues and be mindful at a personal individual level, take accountability for how you're thinking and how you're speaking and how you're acting, and then take group accountability. That comes from leadership, but it also comes from followership. And just don't let things get too far out of alignment where people are getting hurt, they're being blocked legitimate opportunities to make a life for themselves. They're being denied opportunities, or they're being asked to do more than anybody else, or receiving less for the efforts that they put in. And I think if we can stay somewhere in that zone, we'll make a better, more just, more sustainable society. But there's still a lot of challenges in that area.
Yeah. Speaking of challenges, this is one question I always wanted to ask you, and do you think, in 2024, there are still challenges for a black man in a leadership position, and, how has this affected your own journey?
I've been reflecting on that a lot, Ray. From a policing standpoint, obviously I was a much more keen observer of that institution than others, but I noticed coming out of 2014, in the Fergus crisis in the United States, where there was, the first Black Lives Matter. Interestingly, the police chiefs that lost their jobs first as these protests went across the country were actually the most progressive and almost inevitably Black, Latino, or women leaders.
Interesting.
I thought that was kind of a one-off. But then after the murder of George Floyd and the protests, the second Black Lives Matter protest, the same thing happened again. The most progressive police chiefs, Black, Latino, women, were the ones to lose their jobs first of all. I haven't fully sort of deconstructed that, but there's a clear pattern there that should be very concerning for any municipal government, provincial or national government looking to truly advance a healthy form of DEI, particularly in critical areas like policing. What I will tell you more broadly, this concept of breaking the glass ceiling is something that a lot of Black leaders, women leaders, diverse leaders are very, very conscious of and attempt to do. I certainly took pride in the glass ceilings that I broke in Toronto, in Ottawa, and in other parts of the private sector. But the problem is when you break so many glass ceilings, you become wounded. You get a lot of scar tissue. You have a lot of open wounds in an area of your body that is very vulnerable. So you break all these glass ceilings, you finally get to the top floor, the CEO level, the chief of police level in my occasion, where I was the only Black chief in Canada during my tenure in Ottawa. And then you realize, wow, I'm wounded, I'm scarred, I'm tired, I had to do more, work harder, suffer more to get here. And now I'm in this crazy circumstances of a global pandemic, an economic crisis, and all the other things that were going on, including the defund police movement that came out of the murder of George Floyd. And I find myself now, not only have I arrived tired and hurt and bruised, but now there's no floor because the ceiling I broke through was the floor that I'm supposed to be standing on. So I think a lot of Black leaders, women leaders, leaders from diverse communities find themselves in very precarious top-level leadership at a point where they have the least amount of energy and the most jeopardy all around them because the floor itself has got a hole in it. It's not too hard to push a leader like that into that hole, and down they go. And so does the advancements that that individual or that collective of individuals have been working hard for decades to achieve. And that's what I think is probably the great challenge, not just for Black men, Black females, anybody that's coming from a disadvantaged position to create a greater level of equity across the board, having reached the top. They now have to find deeper reserves and avoid a greater set of hazards just to be able to complete their job on a daily basis, just to get to the end of their contract, to accomplish the change mandate that's been put in front of them. So I could go on, but there's a lot of challenges there.
I love it. I love the information that you're sharing here. Earlier, you mentioned something about you view that DEI were kind of going right. Tell me how you feel about that and why that is.
It's all of our systems, all of our elements of our country are tied together. We don't live in isolation. We live next door to still the most powerful country in the world, and their politics, their culture, their views on big issues like DEI influence north of the border in the largest undefended border in the world. Their media is the most influential media, including mainstream and social media. So, as the U.S. goes, we tend to follow, maybe a little bit behind it. It used to be 5 to 10 years. I think it's more like 5 to 10 minutes these days. I also want to recognize that, it's not all on our neighbors to the south. Canada has produced its own horrendous and tragic record of racism and discrimination. We only need to look at our Indigenous brothers and sisters. We need to look at the treatment of Japanese internment camps. We need to look at treatment of Jews coming from war-torn parts of the Second World War and not having full entry, and just numerous examples to this date of highly talented individuals who've been invited here but haven't been given a level playing field in terms of their ability to contribute and improve the lives of their families while improving this country. So these are challenges that go on within Canada. Sometimes we get our better angels together and we move towards a more progressive, inclusive approach to this society. And unfortunately, right now, it seems our better angels are being somewhat overcome by our lesser devils at individual and institutional levels. And I don't see leadership, particularly at any level of government in any of the parties, that's countering that in any substantive way. A lot of performative type of activities, but performative politics around DEI never works. In fact, it makes it worse.
Yeah, that's the challenge. It's always too often performative,
Yeah.
What are the solutions? What do you see our society in the next 5 years? How can we improve, all these things that we're going through in terms of, reducing this performative things, but really, being authentic in what, the changes that society needs to have.
I'll start with the word that you just used last there, authentic. There's a lot of people that can disagree and even very much dislike some of the things I stand for, but what I stand for is what I stand for. And I never change that. For me, that's authenticity. I'd like to think that we're going to have to get a lot better at truth seeking and truth speaking. In any forum that you find yourself, whether it's around a dinner table where you have a family member that you love, but they're speaking untruths, they're moving disinformation and misinformation into family conversation. They're misleading the next generation of young people around that kitchen table towards divisive, non-inclusive thinking and acting out in the schoolyards and in the workplaces. We need to seek truth around our family tables, our dinner tables. We need to speak truth. If we can do that there, I think we can move that into the working environments, into the public squares and the public spaces. I think, new media like yourself, who are inviting people like me on to speak their truth, to test the veracity of that truth by the questions that you ask, and allowing a better public dialogue to take place. I think those are very important elements. Mainstream institutions, politicians, police leaders, journalists, I think we all need to do a better job individually and institutionally. There's no one silver bullet to fix the complex, vexing challenges we all find ourselves in. Everyone's got a role to play. Everyone has a role to play. And enough good people lean into it, we get to a better place eventually.
Peter Sloly, I'd like to thank you for your time. I can't find better words to end this conversation. But it's been an honor to speak to you, and I like to end the conversations with, we learn today and we lead tomorrow. So thanks again.
Thank you so much, Ray. I really appreciate it. God bless.
God bless.